Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, the only podcast with old friends discussing old comics and the people that created them. I'm Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in crime, Orrin Phillips.
How you doing?
And Mike Farah.
Good evening.
So you're going to hear a really interesting interview coming up. It is the first interview that we've had an actual woman on. Up until this point, I know it's a big deal, but up until this point, we've only interviewed men. And, you know, while there's nothing wrong with that, I think it's really important, especially nowadays, you know, to get the point of view of women in the business. She has some very, very interesting stories. We'll be speaking to June Brigman. You may know her from work on Power Pack. She had a Supergirl miniseries. Also, she worked on Star Wars. And I believe she also contributed to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, and on top of that, Mary Worth has been one of the longest running comic strips in newspaper history. And now she's been taking it on for quite a few years now. So her name and legacy is part of that character as well, which I think is really kind of awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a monumental accomplishment. Probably eclipsing, you know, some of the work she did in comic books. But, you know, the name June Brigman for me will always be attached to that iconic cover of Power Pack, that first issue. It's just sort of, she's kind of synonymous with that team and with that comic. And she even came back to do some, you know, updated versions of that team. And so I wasn't privy to this interview, unfortunately, but I'm looking forward to hearing what the guys had to say. So without further ado, this is our interview with June Brigman. Enjoy.
Today, we are absolutely, positively pleased and excited and honored to have June Brigman with us today. Thank you so much, June, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Orrin, by all means, you may kick it off.
Well, I'm very interested how your journey started to get to Marvel. You know, were you interested in comics growing up, and you know, who were some of your influences?
I was not interested in comics growing up. I knew nothing about comics. I had never read a comic until my boyfriend, who is now my husband, showed me some of his comic book collection. It's not like my parents said, "Oh, you can't read that trash" or anything like that. I just wasn't interested. I you know, maybe if there had been comic books about a girl and her horse and her super cat or something, I would have read them. But as a child, I read a lot of horse story books and wasn't interested in comics. But when I was in college, I was an art major at University of Georgia, and I knew I wanted to be a working artist. I wanted to, you know, make some money, be able to support myself as an artist. Was looking towards maybe advertising or illustration. And my boyfriend, now husband, Roy Richardson, was big into comics. And he started showing me some of his collection. The first ones I remember that really made an impression on me were Kirby's Fourth World, New Gods comics. And he had to show me how to read them. I didn't even know which panel to go to. And he's like, "You just let the artist lead your eye." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." And yeah, I love the Kirby Fourth World stuff. Bernie Wrightson, Swamp Thing, Gil Kane. And then he took me to a comic book convention in Atlanta. I think it was the Atlanta Fantasy Fair. And this would have been like way back in the last century, like about 1981 or so. And this was a convention. It was a very small local convention, but it was all about comics and comic book creators. And there were a ton of people that are, you know, pretty legendary now. I think I met Michael Kaluta. Jim Steranko was there. I eventually met Bob McLeod, Joe Rubenstein. I met Gil Kane. And I was just mesmerized by how he was drawing. And I just basically spent most of the convention sitting there watching Gil Kane work. And I thought, that looks like a lot more fun than working in advertising. And these people were actually getting paid to do it. And I've always loved drawing. And that was the spark that got me interested in comics as a career.
And then did you apply directly to Marvel, or did you have some other routes that led into Marvel?
No, excuse me, I'm just shifting a cat. Don't hiss.
We have one too.
Go on, you're being bad. No, I the first company I worked for was a small company in Florida owned by this guy named Bill Black called Americomics. It gave a lot of people their start. I know Jerry Ordway started with them. I'm trying to think who else. But I started working up a portfolio, and he was kind enough to give me a little job to do. And then DC Comics at the time had a new talent showcase book. And I sent my Americomics work into them, and they gave me a little tryout job for their new talent book, like a, I don't know, 8 or 9 page job. And I did that. And the guy who wrote that story, named Steve Ringenberg, was at the time working at Marvel. I can't remember if he was, I think he was like an assistant editor. And he said, hey, and he lived in New York. He said, you know, come on up to New York, and I'll get you into the office. So Roy and I came to New York, and he did get us into the Marvel offices. And back in the day, you could do that. Somebody you knew worked there, they'd let you in, you just sign in at the front door, and then you could make the rounds, walk around, showing your portfolio to different editors. And, you know, that was my start. I got my very first job from Larry Hama on Savage Sword of Conan. And it really sucked. I had no idea what I was doing, but you know, Larry gave me a critique and helped me out. And that was when I met Louise Simonson. She was an editor at Marvel then. So that just, you know, literally I got my foot in the door, and that was my start. And this was about 83, I guess about 1983.
Now, did you guys right away start talking about Power Pack, or was that something that came, you know, down the line a little bit, or?
No, right away. As I remember when I showed Louise my portfolio, she was like, well, I don't really have anything for you right now, but you know, I have this idea for a new series, and I was just wondering, do you know how to draw children? And I was like, yeah, I can kind of draw children. I had a clue. And like that night, I went back to Steve's place, which, as I remember, was like in the Bowery, and it was not gentrified, and it was rough.
Yeah.
But I did some sketches of the 4 kids and came back into the office the next day, and Louise liked them, and that was the start.
I was wondering if you could take us through, how does one pitch a comic, you know, to Marvel or anyone? Like, what are the steps that you guys had to take to get, you know, a green light and all that stuff?
It was very simple.
Oh, really?
Very simple. I mean, I did some more sketches. I did the kids out of costume. I did the kids in costume. Weezy wrote up a proposal. I don't think I didn't even draw any pages. I just did like character designs of the kids. Carl Potts was the editor we were working with. And I can't remember if at that point he went ahead and did drawings of like the Snarks. And I had no idea how to do a spaceship. He did a rough for the Spaceship Friday. Anyway, and Louise presented the proposal to Jim Shooter, who was editor at the time. And he said, yeah, sounds good. Go make comics. Shook hands, signed a contract. That was it. It was really that simple. That simple. It couldn't happen now. I don't know how you would even go about, you know, presenting a new character, a new book to Marvel, how you would go about selling it. It's at that time, it was still almost like a family business. You know, it wasn't so corporate. The money wasn't so big yet. So it was a very simple process.
And what was going through your mind as a young artist? Suddenly, you're going to have your own title. You guys are launching your own thing. Were you nervous, or were you just confident in her writing and your art that it would come?
I was freaked out. I had no idea. It was definitely being thrown into the deep end. I mean, I had never drawn a 22-page comic book. And that first comic, I think, was a 48-pager.
Yeah.
I had never done that before. And now I'm on deadline and I have to figure it out. And I kind of did. I mean, there's a big contrast if you look at that first issue and then look at the second one. I had learned on the job. I was getting better, every time I drew a comic book. But no, I was completely self-taught, as were most artists at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Marvel was really, that was a time where they were really gearing up production, doing a lot of books, and they needed bodies to draw these books, to fill up the shelves. And I was in the right place at the right time for the right project.
What was your turnaround time for back then for projects like that? I mean, I know they're monthly, but behind the scenes, I know those deadlines are way different.
You were expected to draw a monthly book, and that's why there are so many fill-ins on Power Pack, because like I said, I had no idea what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I knew I didn't know what I was doing. And there were a lot of artists around them that were, their talent was really intimidating, and I was just slow. So, they had to have a lot of fill-ins to keep the book going. I eventually figured it out. Actually, after I got off Power Pack, I got faster and started to figure it out. But at that time, the deadlines were really a struggle for me.
I was just going to say, how big a difference was issue 1 from what you guys originally pitched?
I don't think it was that different. I mean, Weezy had a pretty clear idea about the kids. I think my input might have been to make them all argue more, and make Jack more ornery. Apparently Weezy and her sisters all got along really well together. I was like, no. Kids, are mean to each other, and they fight and they argue and disagree. So that might have been my main input. But she, I mean, we hung out together, we had dinner together, we talked about the kids, but she was pretty clear about those characters and those stories and what she wanted to do.
Artistically, where do you draw your inspiration from? I know you said you were self-taught as it pertains to this, but does it go beyond just, comic book artists? Is it, artists outside of comics that you draw your inspiration from?
I know my inspiration for children, a lot of that comes from an artist in the early 20th century named Jessie Wilcox Smith.
Okay.
And she was very famous for her children. That was her specialty. And she was very successful. I mean, at the time, she was making money off her illustrations that I'd be happy to get now. And we're talking about 1920s, 1910s, 20s, that era. Mm-hmm. But her children were very natural. They were very believable, not just in, their physical looks, but the way they moved, their gestures. They had, childlike quality. Mm-hmm. So that's always kind of inspired my children. But then as far as like comic book storytelling, it was the artist I was into at the time, which, was Gil Kane. Gil Kane, if I ever have any sense of dynamic action and foreshortening my work, that probably comes from Gil Kane. Ross Andrew. I loved Bernie Wrightson, just loved him to death. And, Joe Kubert, Walt Simonson. I don't draw like any of these guys. I wish I did. Oh, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez,
Mhm.
um, my art god. Not that I draw
Everyone else that has mentioned him has done the same thing. So
We feel the same way. Though.
um, it's not like you can't. It's not like you're going to look at my work and say, "Oh, I see Walt Simonson or Gilbert." You're not going to see them, but I tried to learn from them. I tried to think like them, look at how they told stories or compositions, structured their figures. You know, that was my education.
Now, were you allowed to choose which inker you wanted to go with for these books, or was it assigned to you by?
Bob Wycheck was assigned. Carl Potts was our editor, and I didn't know inkers. I was so new to the business, and although I eventually ended up working with my husband, he was new as well, and they didn't want to put a new inker with a new penciler.
Right.
So they assigned Bob Wycheck, and I was very lucky to get him. I mean, there were a lot of good inkers at the time, but he was well suited to my pencils. He he helped me out a lot. He had a nice clean look without being dead or stiff, so it worked out well.
How important is that dynamic to have, someone who complements your style, when you're doing this kind of art?
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been fast enough to ink my own work. I'll ink like maybe a cover, or like if I'm doing a spot illustration. I've never inked a whole comic. Don't really want to. But I mean, and I've been very fortunate to mostly have really good inkers. But I mean, a bad inker can just kill you. I mean, they can just murder your work.
Right.
The best inkers, some of the best inkers are also they're really good pencilers. But then some of them who are really good pencilers, you end up looking like them.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line for an inker to walk. They want to embellish, they want to emphasize, they want to add without taking over.
Yeah, just with Power Pack, what I liked about it was a book that focused on kids. They're growing up, but they also have these mutant abilities, so it's a dual learning process. Yeah, but did you focus this as a book aimed towards younger readers, or was it a book about younger readers but for a regular audience?
I don't know that we ever talked about what audience we were focused on. It did just so happen to be about kids, but I mean, Weezy's writing, to me, it's like classic juvenile science fiction. And those kind of books like, Madeline L'Engle, Andre Norton, the Robert Heinlein juvenile books, you can read that as an adult and enjoy it. I can't remember ever talking about, oh, we're gonna target this age group or that age group. We were just trying to tell good stories.
Did Marvel have a plan for it that they let you in on, or they just sort of put it out there and that was that?
Put it out there. I don't think there was a any kind of concerted PR targeting effort that I was aware of. There may have been something going on that I never heard about, but also at that time, Marvel comics were more all ages. I mean, the Epic line was more like their adult line.
Right.
They didn't need a separate imprint for young reader books. It's very different now.
I say they also had those Star comics that they were starting to toy with a little bit.
Yeah, that was a little later, I think. But no, Marvel comics were all ages comics, and it just fell into that group.
And you guys have done, you've revived it a number of times from this original run. Like there's still a popularity for it. There's still, fans out there. What do you think works so well between you guys in doing these books that it's lasted this long?
I don't know. I mean, there have been different incarnations. Of course, now they've aged the characters, made them into teenagers, which I think is a mistake. It kind of takes away from what was unique about the book. I think the reason it's still around is that there are people who are passing these books along to their kids. I'll be at a convention and somebody will come up to me and say, oh, I read this when I was a kid and now my kids are reading it. And it is something that they enjoyed when they were growing up that is appropriate to hand to, you know, their 6, 7, 8-year-old.
Right. It's pretty awesome.
So I had a question for you, and this will probably be the most controversial thing I've ever asked, and I'm doing this air quotes. So, so both Orrin and I have daughters, and you are the first woman we've had on our show. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about what you thought about, you know, the women in comic books nowadays. And I'll preface this with, I know years ago. And by all means, look, if you don't want to answer this, please tell me.
I get asked this all the time now.
Okay. So I know the term "women in refrigerators" was a thing for a while, and I
heard that one.
I was really okay.
Yeah.
So Orrin didn't either, and I was like, really? I was surprised. I was kind of, you know, years ago when I heard about it, but it was basically the use of women, or the maiming of women, more or less, in comics to advance the story. And I guess it came about as a result of in Green Lantern, where Kyle Rayner's girlfriend is killed and by the bad guy and shoved in a refrigerator. I mean, it's terrible. Probably one of the most shocking things I'd read up until that point. But you know, that it was a term that was coined after that. And I guess there was something that comics had fallen into, you know, as a result, as, you know, an inspiration for their heroes to, you know, take them to the next step. And there was a website created about it. And I guess the basic gist of it was, you know, women are really only being used for this purpose. And, you know, as a father of a daughter, and I'm at the point where I want to get them into comic books, and it seems like we're at a really good time nowadays, at least, where things are really much more positive for women in that sense. Like, you know, you have, you know, look, Wonder Woman is, you know, being advertised as like the forefront of the big three in most cases when it comes to DC, and Black Widow, and, you know, you have, you know, various changes in Marvel in terms of women. So I think it's amazing. And I was just curious what your thoughts were on that type of thing.
That type of thing, you know, how is it handled? What's the purpose? Women in refrigerators, or like The Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Classic example.
Right.
I mean, I'm friends with Brian Bolland, and he's an incredible artist. Is it really necessary to the character and the plot, or is it gratuitous? I have a problem with extreme violence in comics, period. I mean, hey, listen, I've watched Daredevil on Netflix, and even though I loved it, there are a few episodes where I thought, I don't know if I want to keep watching this, and I wish this weren't a Marvel character, but it is. And it's I think it's a wonderfully well-written show, well acted. But in comic books, as far as the treatment of women in comics, I think that's going to change. I think a lot of the extreme violence has been just, like I said, gratuitous, a cheap way of getting some advertisement. Mm-hmm. I just don't know that it has a place, or if it does have a place, it should be in a separate imprint from the main comic book line. You know, back in the day when you worked for Marvel or DC, they would send you every month, you get a case of like everything they published, one of everything they published. And we finally had so many that at Halloween we would start handing them out to kids. But at some point it was like we had to
I gotta find that house.
edit that. We had to kind of censor that. We started realizing some of these books we need to hang on to. We don't need to be handing them to kids. And I kind of wish that hadn't happened, you know, but times change, people change. That's it.
Oh, fair enough. Thank you for answering. I was just curious to hear your point of view on that.
I want to jump back. I know you worked on a few different books for Marvel. You had a few runs on Alpha Flight. What was your thought on Alpha Flight as a series as a whole? Did you think it was a well done series? Did you think it was missing a few ingredients to make it, a little more upper echelon with the rest of the stuff, or what were your thoughts on it?
I don't know. I mean, when I actually did it for about a year, and that was when I finally started to get up to speed on deadlines. Not my favorite work. I did some good work on the book, but a lot of it I think was really, really rushed.
Right.
And Bill Mantlo was writing it. I wasn't a big fan of the direction he took the book in. I liked it very much when John Byrne started it and was working on it. I liked the characters. I mean, he took it in a much darker direction, and it was a different book, drawing that was different from what I thought it would be. The stories and the characters, it just wasn't as much fun.
Right.
I thought it got very dark, very serious, and I kind of missed the fun and the entertainment of the John Byrne version.
I agree. Did you have to change your artistic style at all to match that sort of darker tone of the book?
Somewhat. I mean, I'm trying to remember what was going on in it now. I probably did. I mean, the tone of a story definitely is going to affect your approach, your style to the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
You might start, if it's a darker, grittier story, you're going to use more black, more shadows, maybe more expressive line. I mean, it can be artistically challenging and in a good way.
Right.
To do a story like that makes you stretch and change your style a little. My style also probably changed because I was really trying to keep up with the monthly deadline. So, I think that would have an effect too.
How harsh were they on that? Would you get calls constantly saying like, hey,
Poor Carl Potts was the editor on that too. And yeah, but I did manage, I didn't mess up my deadlines. I think I had about a year-long run on that without any fill-ins, which was pretty good for me.
Right.
But it was hard. I never, some artists really thrive on that. I did not.
Now, were you doing other things as well, or were you just focused solely on Alpha Flight at the time?
No, that was all I could do at that time. It was all I could do to get Alpha Flight done.
And did you choose to move on from there, from Alpha Flight to other stuff, or?
I can't remember. I can't remember what I did after Alpha Flight. I can't remember the timing now. I did a lot of fill-ins on different books. I did an X-Men fill-in. I did a two-issue graphic novel, She-Hulk graphic novel with Dwayne McDuffie. At some point, I started working on Barbie. And then
what was that like?
Yeah, I'm sure you all read that.
I bought a couple issues for my daughter, and she has them upstairs just because she likes the dolls. But what? Because I think John Romita Jr. did the first issue.
You might have.
Yeah. How was that? Because then you sort of answering to Marvel and Mattel, I would think, as to what they wanted everything to look like.
Mattel was weird.
Were they really?
I'm sorry, but they didn't even refer to Barbie as Barbie. She was the doll.
Really?
Oh yeah. And you cannot draw the doll. You could not draw Barbie doing something that the doll could not do.
Oh, brother.
So she couldn't bend her knees or anything?
I think she could bend her knees if she was like twisting too much or turning too much. It's like, no, the doll can't do that.
Wow.
And if you drew her with like 4 eyelashes instead of 3, they would reject it.
So one question I had was, at what point, when did you make your way over to DC?
Hey guys, we talk a lot about comics, but one comic that is one of our favorites is Yeet Presents. It's one of the best independent comics on the market. The newest issue just came out. Chamber of Yeet, story by upcoming guest Len Mihalovich, right there on the cover. Flip it over, our pal Dennis Miller did a story too. Also stories in there by good friend and former guest Jason Mink, along with other great talents. Some of the folks who've been in Yeet Presents: Mike Barron, Tom Morzachowski, Steve Rude, a lot of other
William
Pestalozzi.
Messner-Loebs.
Yes, he's one of the constants on there. So check it out. And the links down below is the how to get it. It's $5 an issue. Comes out monthly. You're not going to regret picking up Yeet Presents.
I can't remember exactly the point, but I guess I did a couple of fill-ins. Seems like I did a fill-in on Teen Titans. What else did I do a fill-in on? Legion. I think I did one fill-in on Legion. And then I did a Supergirl miniseries. And that would have been about 93, 94, I think. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. I worked with Butch Geis on Jackson Geis as an inker. And Howard, not Howard, I'm sorry, Roger Stern. Roger Stern. Very different guy.
Yeah, just a bit.
And no, that was fun. That was a good experience. And that was kind of just before things started to, I guess after that I think after that was when I did a Star Wars mini series for Dark Horse with Louise Simonson. And that was kind of just before everything kind of imploded.
What was there a big difference, did you notice, between the two, how they were run, DC and Marvel?
Not really. They still wanted me to meet my deadlines. No, I can't say that I did. I wasn't around the office as much at DC as I have been at Marvel. So as far as the atmosphere around the office, I can't really speak to that.
Okay.
And you also did the Lex Luthor Supergirl one-off, which I really enjoyed. I actually read it again a couple of months ago because I liked it so much. How was that, doing that? It was a very interesting story, and sort of for both characters.
Yeah, I thought it was a great story, but I don't think they'll ever reprint it. It's never been reprinted. It
What do you think that is?
it just doesn't fit into the DC universe anymore.
Really? Everything counts now.
When would think?
That's what they keep saying, at least. I mean, everything counts. Everything's...
After all these years, they reprinted all kinds of stuff, but not that.
So you actually brought up a really interesting point. So I know you worked on Convergence, and I would love to know what'd you think about working on Convergence? Only because, as a fan, I was, this was hyped up for quite a bit, and I was looking forward to it, and I'm not the type of person to knock anything down, to raise up anything else, but I'm just saying, as a fan, I thought it was going to be a much bigger event. And it seems like it was just a jumping off point for something else. And I was curious to know if that was meant to be like a big thing, like a pre-crisis type of event in the comics world.
Like every couple of years, the big two come up with some world changer.
Yeah, everything is always ever changing. So,
retcon some things. I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed working. I got to work with Louise Simonson. I got to draw Steel, which was kind of outside my wheelhouse, but it was a blast.
Yeah, he's a character, I think, that is underappreciated. I really liked him ever since Death of Superman.
I don't often get to do the big superhero guys like that. So just artistically, I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Are there characters that you would love to get your hands on and really sink your teeth into in that sense?
Uh, it would be fun to play with some Jack Kirby characters. I would love to do, Big Barda,
Mhm.
Beautiful Dreamer, the Jack Kirby female characters would be fun to play with. I'd
Mhm.
love to get into that sandbox.
Yeah, I thought we were going to have those characters in the new movie. It would have been a prime time to have those characters like front and center in comics again, but
Yeah,
alas.
I guess we're not going to have an Eternals movie after all.
We're not really?
I think Eternals is on New Gods.
New Gods, yeah, New Gods, and some Aquaman movie was not going to happen or something.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got confused.
Oh no, we're going to get Eternals whether we like it or not, I think.
Oh, okay. We will. It was a New Gods movie.
Probably
Oh,
on
it
Disney
was a
Plus.
New Gods movie. That was it. Yeah.
What was the Star Wars experience like? Was Lucasfilms heavily involved again with how you drew things and the way things looked, or were you kind of given free rein to?
I think it was. I think they were more concerned about the writing.
Okay.
I know Weezy originally wanted to use Boba Fett, and they said no, you can't. He's overexposed.
Wow.
So we had to come up with another character, and I was like, I'm not going to make up another character for George Lucas. I went through that experience in another book I won't go into, but so we just kind of went through the Star Wars Bible and picked this character instead of Boba Fett. Now if my husband were up here, he could tell you what he is. He appeared in like one scene in the bar or something. He's a Glocal, or I can't remember the name of it now. Anyway, he was already in the Star Wars universe. You saw him for like 5 seconds in one of the movies, and we're like, yeah, that's the one. We'll use him.
That's one of the beautiful things about those movies. Like any character that had like a second of screen time had a figure, a background story, and a spin-off.
Yeah. Yeah, if my husband Roy was up here, he's downstairs working, he could tell you exactly who that was, but I can never remember.
Was it fun though, putting all that together? Being part of the Star Wars universe.
Oh sure. Oh yeah, it is cool. I mean, I'm not only do I have a Wikipedia page, I have a Wikipedia page, which I think is awesome.
Do you? Oh, I'm referencing that. I'm going to put that up on this.
I don't know
That's
I don't know who did the Wikipedia page either, but anyway, you're out there.
Yeah, Wikipedia though, that's cool.
It is.
And was Dark Horse cool to work with? Because I know they really started to get a good amount of momentum in the early and mid 90s, and getting some key titles and deals from movies and stuff like that.
No, they were good. I mean, to me, the company's good if they leave me alone, let me do the work, and they pay within a month.
Right.
I'm sorry, that's my
Not in that order. Not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, one of the questions I had was, the late 80s, early 90s comes, and there's sort of a shift in comic book art with the Todd McFarlanes and the Rob Liefelds. Guys are getting bigger and there's muscles all over and giant guns and stuff like that, which is a lot different from your artwork. And like you said, you weren't a big fan of the violence and stuff like that. And a lot of these books were becoming, quite graphic. Did you think then, should I tweak my work, or did you say to yourself that this just isn't for me?
The business was changing so much then, and I don't know. I never thought about trying to change my work. I just felt like it was a change in fashion. I mean, I remember about that time when the Image look, well, actually these guys were still at Marvel. They hadn't even formed Image yet, but I was at a convention and we were sitting next to George Perez. And there was this huge line on the other side of the room for Todd McFarlane. And people were like, George who?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Incredible.
Wow.
Incredible. And but then that was about the time, it was right after we did the Star Wars miniseries. That would have been about 95 when the whole collectible explosion started to die.
Yeah.
And sales started to go down and books were getting canceled and artists were out of work. And that was when I started doing the comic strip Brenda Starr. And it just worked out. You know, I was really, at the time when I started, I remember some of my friends, other artists in the business are like, why do you want to do that? They're paying you what? Oh. And a year later, they're like, can you get me in? Are there any other available? I'm like, well, no, I don't know.
Well, how does that work though? Because comic strips are what started all this. I mean, comic strips are the original things and the start of comic books. How was it a big adjustment for you going from, you know, the comic book world to comic strips, and what adjustments did you have to make?
It was a big adjustment, mainly in the formatting. A comic book page, you've got about a 10 by 15 live area, and you can pretty much do with it what you will as far as size, number, shape, arrangement of panels. Just tell the story, and you know how you tell it is pretty much up to you. But the formatting of a comic strip is very limiting and is set in stone, and you cannot change it. And the deadlines, it's just different. I mean, of course, both fields have their deadline pressures, but with a comic book, you kind of finish a book and you get a little closure. Like, okay, I finished those 22 pages. I finished that 48 pages. Now I can go on. And with a comic strip, because it's published every day, it just feels more relentless. You know, it never, if you do well, it never stops. And that's the good part, and that's the bad part too. So.
Do they, to that point, do they ever go on like a hiatus or time? You know, they take a break?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you just got to keep cranking those out.
Yeah, you can't, because if you take a break, that newspaper is going to fill that space with something else.
Okay.
And they may not give it. They won't give it back to you.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So how far in advance do you do up your drawings? I mean, do you send in a block that will last, you know, maybe a month? Or...
Oh, that's a dream. No. No, almost everybody does a comic strip. If you ask them, they'll be like, oh, I'm never far enough ahead. You're never as far ahead as you want to be. Right now, I think we're on the Sunday pages. I think we're 6 weeks ahead. On the dailies, we're a month. I think it might be closer than that. And we should really be at least 2 more weeks ahead. I mean, we're okay. We're okay. We're cutting it a little close.
Right.
But like if we wanted to take time off to go away to a convention or take a vacation or something, we would have to double up and get further ahead, you know. And then when we came back, we'd be behind again. So, you know, that's the life.
So that makes it so you must really love doing it if you don't mind the stress, and it's just like a train. It doesn't stop. Like, is this some of the best stuff, you know, that you think you've done, or
No.
you just really enjoy?
No, I think I have done some good work. I think certainly in Brenda Starr, I look back at some of them, and I'm very proud of them. And then now I do a strip called Mary Worth, and there are times I'm proud of that too. And then sometimes it's you get it done. You
Yeah.
get it done. I want to do work that's competent and professional.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some times when I'm like, oh, okay, that was some good storytelling. That was, you know, some nice work. I work on it with my husband. But then sometimes it's just, you know, you're proud that you got it done, pretty much.
How did you you started working on Mary Worth? That's been around for quite some time. I mean, how you know?
Well, I haven't been working on it the whole time.
I was going to ask, how did you start working on that? I mean,
I got that because I had done Brenda Starr.
okay.
Brenda Starr was canceled in 2011, and it was not long after that. I was. Oh, here comes a cat.
You know, my son does the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't long after Brenda was, actually it was like right after Brenda was canceled. I was contacted by the editor-in-chief at King Features, Brendan Burford, and he just said, hey, you know, would you be open to maybe someday drawing Mary Worth? Because the current artist is Joe Giella, who's amazing, just a legendary artist. And you know, Brenda was looking to the time when Joe might want to retire. I mean, he was going to let Joe draw the thing as long as he wanted to. He's a great artist and a great job. But Joe, when I took it over, was 87,
Wow.
87 years old, still doing a daily comic strip. You know, and I met his wife at Baltimore Comic Con, and she was like, thank you, thank you. And when Joe did decide to retire, Brendan contacted me, and my husband and I, we did a week worth of, you know, sample strips, and they liked it. And they knew we, you know, could handle the grind because we did Brenda for 15 years. So that was how I got on Mary Worth.
I say it's got to be pretty awesome to know that your name is now associated with this, you know, a legendary comic strip. Like, you know, you are the person who's putting it out there, you know, for everyone now. So it's a pretty.
It's an honor. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a rare thing. There aren't very many of us left, especially on the continuity strip. I mean, I'm friends with Jim Keefe and Terry Beatty and Mike Manley, and we kind of have our, you know, dinosaur club because that's what we feel like. We feel like we're going to go the way of the dinosaurs. So it's a great honor, you know, to get to do something like that.
That's pretty awesome.
That is.
I also want to talk a little bit. I know you've done some teaching as well, teaching art, and I saw a teaching about comic storytelling. What are some of the things that you teach with the comic storytelling? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I taught for 2 years at the Joe Kubert School in Dover, New Jersey. That was my start. I wanted to try teaching, and at that time I didn't have a bachelor's degree yet, but Joe was more interested in your experience than, you know, what kind of degrees you had, and he basically shook my hand and said, go teach. And that was a great experience. I mean, I once again was learning on the job. And at that time I was just teaching. I taught figure drawing to like all the first year students. I was just part-time. And then we moved from New York back to Georgia, and I taught for 9 years at Savannah College of Art and Design, their Atlanta campus. And the classes, and once again, I was an adjunct, I was part-time. And the classes I taught were focused on, I taught a class called Drawing for Sequential that focused on figure drawing and composition and perspective. And then I taught some other classes that were more focused on storytelling. Some were very basic, and some were for, you know, second and third year students who had, you know, some foundation classes under their belt. And, you know, a lot of it was just, you got to try it. You know, I can lecture, I can draw, I can show you some examples, but you got to do it. You got to try it, and you got to mess up, and then you got to get feedback from me and try it again. So, you know, and now I teach at Kennesaw State University, just outside of Atlanta. It has a great art department. And I just started teaching there this fall, just one class, also comic book storytelling. And, you know, I just started out with something. Actually, I started out with like a comic strip, and then expand the comic strip into a comic book page, and then expand into 5 pages. And, you know, just keep building. And I'll give assignments that are already scripted from, you know, professional writers. What I love to do to freak them out is to give them one of the scripts that Louise Simonson's given me with Power Pack, because her writing is very condensed.
Yeah.
Very, I mean, you got 4 characters, these 4 kids, and there's some panels where they're all doing something at once, and that just blows their minds. But I love it. You know, I was never interested in teaching until I found out I could teach what I do, you know, what I love.
And they know exactly that who you are, and you know all this stuff that you've done, or they just know you
do. I mean, listen, if I were going to take the class, I'd be Googling my instructor, but some of them are like, what? What? Power Pack? You're who? You know?
When I worked for a little company called Marvel.
They don't care. Actually, the way I establish my street cred is I draw. I just stand up in front of the class with a big newsprint pad and draw Supergirl or Power Pack Kid or something, and that usually gets their attention.
That worked for me. What would you recommend for any person, student, someone who is interested in it? How would you recommend they start off, or, you know, follow a path in that career? Would it be starting with kind of like, you know, comic strip, like newspaper comic strips? Just I know nothing about this. That's why, if I'm kind of not saying it correctly, excuse me, but like, you know, how would you recommend someone like that, you know, pursuing that career?
Well, there are a lot more avenues now than when I was starting out. I mean, when I was starting, there was pretty much the big 2, Marvel and DC. That was what you did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it depends on the age of the person. If it's a kid, I just say you just keep drawing. Just draw what you like. Draw what you love. Have fun, but draw.
Mm-hmm.
Build sketchbooks and draw. If it's someone older, say high school, looking at, you know, what they're going to do after high school, I would say, you know, start looking, find artists that you like and study them, but try not to copy them too much. Study them and then put them away and find your own style and direction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and study some of the basics. Study figure drawing, study perspective, which kids are like, oh, perspective. Gotta learn it. It's not that hard once you get the hang of it. Study some of the foundational skills, find an artist you like, study that artist, find some good books. There's tons of books out there on comics. Find the ones that are actually, that are authored by people who actually work in the business,
mm-hmm.
are professionally published, have work that appears on someplace other than Instagram. Not that there's anything wrong with Instagram, but people who are actually getting paid a decent pay for doing the work. Study those people. And as far as going to a school, you know, to get a degree in sequential art, it is not necessary. Nice, you can do it. Having a degree is nice. It is not necessary to work in comics. And, you know, work up a portfolio. You can get your work out there. Of course, now we have the internet. I didn't have the internet. We actually have physical portfolios we show to people at conventions. Go to conventions, talk to professional artists. You know, look at their work, pick their brains, you know, find out how they got started. Make actual physical face-to-face connections with people that will aid you in the future. There's tons of tutorials on YouTube, but find something that you're good at that most people aren't. I mean, I know kids love manga and anime.
Yeah.
But, you know, I see so many students that look like their work has been rubber stamped. It's okay to study that stuff, but put it away and find your own direction, find your own look. The only reason I'm here talking to you guys, the only reason you know who I am is that I could do something that other artists weren't good at. I could draw kids. That's it. That's the only reason why anybody cares about anything I do now. So find your own thing. that's it.
Now,
Stay focused.
yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say, you teach art and you teach storytelling. Do you have a story that you want to tell? Do you have a comic in your mind that you want to put together that's all you? Or have you ever thought about doing something that, your own creation and just going for that?
Well, I mean, we did. I got to do that a few years ago with this comic book called Captain Ginger that I did with Stuart Moore, and it was for Ahoy Comics. And I really I love that comic book, and that was all my own designs, and we worked up those characters together, and that was my chance to after Power Pack to do something that I was very much in control of along with my co-creator, the writer, and do what I wanted to do. And I hope that we can maybe we did 10 issues of that, and it's been collected in a couple of trade paperbacks, but the way we ended it was a little unsatisfying. So I'm hoping that soon we can get back to that, maybe do like a one-shot wrap up with those characters. But I love drawing Captain Ginger. I would love to get to do more of that. I mean, right now we're in the middle of, we're doing a 5-issue Power Pack miniseries. I'm not sure. I think it'll come out in July. They may push it back because we're being so slow. So I still love doing Power Pack. I'd love to do a Western. I would love to do a Western someday. I love drawing horses. I'd love to do a, kind of a feminist Western story. My husband and I have talked about that. He's a pretty good writer.
Mhm.
So, someday we may come up with something and pitch it to some companies and self-publish, something like that.
I said, do you have any favorite Western artists from, Marvel or DC or?
Oh gosh, well, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez has done some killer Western work. So did Joe Kubert.
Yeah.
Other artists, I love artists that are good at drawing horses. John Buscema was great at drawing horses. Gil Kane was great at drawing horses. Artists I studied with one summer, Sam Sabat, did these great covers, but that wasn't for DC. That was for Dell Comics of different horse stories. So I don't know. Oh, well, of course, there's Mobius and the Blueberry books. Holy moly. Those are just killer. I can't even think about that, or I'll be like, nah, I can't even try it. It's too intimidating.
I think that'd be pretty awesome though, because it's obviously something you have a passion for, and the talent's there. So I think that's really cool to see.
Good.
That's very nice. What are some cool moments that you've had in your career that as a fan, meeting someone, a big name, or something that happened at a convention that you're just like, wow, I can't believe this is happening.
Let's see. You want to hear my Stan Lee story?
Love to hear.
We'd love to hear a Stanley story.
Stan Lee. This was when Power Pack had just come out. Started working on Power Pack, and I was going to the Marvel offices. I think this is when they were still at like 28th and Park. And Roy wasn't with me. I was going in by myself. And I got on the elevator, and I swear it was just like in a movie. The doors were sort of closing, and this guy dashes on the elevator just before the doors close. And it's Stan Lee. And I think I'm standing there with my portfolio. I'm like, God, do I say something? Like, how can I not say something? And so I said something like, Mr. Stan Lee. And I said, yes. And he's a tall guy. He was tall. He was probably a good 6 foot tall guy. You don't realize that, you see him when he's old, but he was still young. This was probably like 84, 85. He was young then. And I introduced myself. Hi, I said, I'm June Brigman. And I started to tell him what I did. And he takes my hand, he's like pumping my hand. He goes, oh yes, yes, my dear, Power Pack. Wonderful job. I have your poster in my office. And he's like pumping my hand and telling me what a great job it is. He knew exactly who I was and
That's
exactly what I did. And was charming as hell. And, you know, could have sold me the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, I think that was at the time when he was out in Hollywood. And I think he was being kind of criticized for not keeping up with what was going on at Marvel with the comic books. But he had done his homework, you know, because I didn't have to explain anything to him.
That's pretty awesome.
That was yeah.
I've read that about him, is like, you know, yeah, he was he had his hands in a lot of stuff, but you know, he was familiar with people and their work. Like, you know, he would reference, you know, obviously, you know, it just in an elevator, boom, he pulled out, you know, from the back of his head what you're working on. I mean, you know, there's something to be said about that. If, you know, the man's been at that job for as long as he has and seen everything. So then he said Excelsior and ran out the door, I'm sure. So
Sad.
yeah.
I just have one more question. Jim Shooter, you hear a lot of things back and forth about him. What was your impression of him?
He was great to me. I mean, I know, you know, there were some artists that worked with him that basically had nervous breakdowns. But for me, I mean, he for one thing, he let us do Power Pack, you know, and I was a complete unknown basically, and he gave me this regular book, let me create these characters and do a regular title. So, you know, he was always fine with me, and but also I think for the most part I didn't work on books that sold very well. I think the books that were selling well, he was going to be maybe looking over your shoulder more,
Right.
you know, but with the books I was working on, he left me alone, you know, let me figure it out, do my job. That was my impression of him.
And it helped to have something like that too, just to have a little more freedom to learn and grow as you did.
It was incredible. It was,
Yeah.
you know, on the job training that I don't think would happen now.
Yeah. No.
You know, I was also lucky that by the time I started the royalty program was also in place.
Okay.
So,
Oh, wow.
you know, people were starting to make some decent money. And that was because of Shooter.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Well, that's all my questions, Warren. You're all good?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey,
June, thank you so much for your time.
that was nice. That was fun. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thank you. Like I said, we don't want to, you know, completely respectful of you and what you do. So really appreciate your time and you speaking with us.
Well, you're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And I'm sure at some point in our discussions afterwards, we may have other questions. So in the future, if you're available, we would love to have you back on.
Okay. Well, I would love to do it maybe after, you know, my little Power Pack miniseries comes out, and maybe there's a Disney Marvel streaming little Power Pack series or something.
That would be awesome.
Are you alluding to something right now that we should be reading between the lines?
Sorry, no. There's always talk. There's always talk.
I thought maybe we could get the scoop. But,
Sorry. I'll give you a little wink, wink, nod, nod. But
No. Okay.
but it could happen.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much. And everyone, if you could like and subscribe, if you have questions, comments, concerns, by all means, let us know. And by all means, try to get as much of June's content as you possibly can. June, is there anything you would like to plug before we go?
I guess I'll just say look for Power Pack coming to you this summer.
So that was our interview with June Brigman. Really interesting and just a pleasure to speak to her. I really enjoyed hearing, about her time at Marvel, working with Lucasfilm on Star Wars. Always really cool to hear about that stuff.
And fun fact, after this interview, my children became fans of Power Pack. So we have gotten a number of Power Pack comics, which they have read, and it's pretty awesome how things come together.
I was very happy to hear you guys touch on her collaborations with Louise Simonson. They became quite the team at Marvel and DC, actually, during her time in comics. And but that'll do it, I think, for this edition of Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching us. If you're on YouTube, remember we are a podcast. Please download us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. If you are listening to us, we are on YouTube. So check us out at Dollar Bin Bandits. We're also all over the social networks, Dollar Bin Bandits on Facebook and Instagram, as well as at DB Bandits on Twitter. So that's going to do it for our interview with June Brigman. We'll be back next week with another interview, and please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Check you later.